Traditional training methods, in order to scale, must have universally applicable information. The learning takeaways is at a high enough level so that each individual can extrapolate from that high level data and apply the lessons to their unique situations. The goal here is to be relevant enough to everybody for them to take something away. Teams are often asked to show how effective the training was by fulfilling metrics that indicate their successful extrapolation and application. Since everybody has a similar problem, we think, the metrics should be easy enough to show improvement across the board, except for those troubled teams that may need a little extra help, of course. And really, it's understandable why leaders choose universal training for teams. In the simplified reporting that developers provide non-coding audiences, it does sound like a theme. In this case, two teams say it's slow to test and another says it's slow to code. As a manager, I hear slow, slow, and slow. So clearly this is a productivity problem. Given that feedback, it only makes sense that some universal training and metrics should do the trick. Since it was a productivity issue, Scrum training with iterations is a natural solution. Yet, in a few months, metrics are showing a Hawthorne effect, temporary small improvement before falling back to old norms. So let's do some root cause analysis on the original problem. In this case, our three teams respond with a little more variation. The first team comes up with mocking the God classes. The second team reports that unpredictable bugs are in the God classes. And then the third team says that mocking database is slow. So now I have two themes, mocking and God classes. As a leader trying to solve a problem, I'm thrilled to have two clear themes. So now I know to do a design patterns class for God classes and a TDD class to learn mock better. And many good companies would do this. Unfortunately, though, we have bad news. Everyone is bored in the classes, most of the information isn't relevant, and they're struggling to apply it. The good news is that they can slightly improve the fundamental problem, but this is not the clear win that you wanted. Let's take this question one step further. As a leader, what if I asked, why does the code have this problem? They may need help from a technical coach to clearly articulate it, but this time we get very specific responses. The first team comes back with all the code needs data from the God classes. The second team says that everyone updates the God classes randomly. And then the third team reports that everyone accesses the database directly. However, this poses kind of a big problem. We no longer have a simple universal solution. We now have three very unique problems. The course-based approach at this point reaches the absurd. While these courses were correctly identified, the reality is that each team needed a very specific yet very different set of information from the courses. And in the case of the database testing problem, it was the wrong course entirely. As a result, this is where most companies hire a technical coach by the day. While this is slow and very accurate, it is expensive and can't scale. So given all of that, how does Deep Roots, a consultancy for technical excellence, address what's relevant for the teams and produce that learning in a way that can scale quickly? We do start with one very applicable universal set of practices. The number one technical problem for all teams is addressed in the Deep Roots Insight Loop. Studies show that reading code accounts for most of the time spent by developers, and unreadable code accounts for the largest single category of bugs. That being the case, it benefits every developer to learn practices that make code readable. And this is the focus of the Insight Loop. As mobbing is one of the most effective ways to learn, Deep Roots uses this method to introduce the techniques in the actual code base the team is working in. While the developers will practice this technique one at a time over the next 2 weeks, which is critical for real change, this mobbing experience creates awareness and gives immediate application. The additional benefit to this particular mobbing workshop and on-the-job training is that it can be done virtually, which solves the training challenges that offshore and strongly distributed teams experience. Once the teams have all taken the Insight Loop, one virtual workshop and 3 2-week coached habit shifts later, they now have a fundamentally improved productivity. In fact, the Deep Roots promise is a rate of at least 30% improvement. However, this has not solved the direct problems. Now, though, each team can select exactly the change series that applies to their problems, and even the specific habit that immediately addresses it. So it's probably not surprising, given the problems that these teams have, that the first team selected the change series of fixed God classes, and the last team selected the change series of test challenging dependencies. But what specific habit solves each of these problems? The first team selected the habit of primitive whole values. The second team selected the habit of explicit data, while the third team selected the habit of testable services. With the assistance of the Deep Roots technical coaching, teams can choose the most relevant learning that they need. These 3 teams had solved their blocker in 2 weeks. This is one habit that had 4 2-day shifts. Their investment totaled 3 hours of demos and retrospectives with Deep Roots, along with clear instruction for what to practice each day in their code base. While this scenario gave an example of each team having one problem, the reality is that teams have multiple problems and would need multiple habits. And now, with the Deep Roots catalog, your teams can customize to what they need to serve your organization.